to have you join us here today. Very much welcome to all of you on this happy sunny day, at least in Wisconsin. What you see here is a series of webinars that started in January and will run through early summer. The first two briefings here are aimed at our IT and manager partners at state agencies. One is done, and the other will be in May. The hot topic webinars cover pressing issues in the archival world, and if you're interested in seeing any more information about any of these, please feel free to check our PERS portal at the CoSA website, and that direction is down at the bottom of this slide. But today we're going to start up the first of a 3-webinar series and provide you some information about some of the key concepts and challenges of preserving e-records throughout the records management lifecycle in your organization until they meet their disposition date. We are also going to be having some guest speakers come in along the way to share some really great initiatives and programs that are taking place around the country. And it's our hope that by the end of the series, you're going to be able to apply what you learn here where you live. So for today's webinar and the rest of the series, we will be recording these, and they should be available in about a week. So if you have any burning desire to come back and take a look again, you are more than welcome to, or if you would like to share them. Those will be available on the website as well. So here are our presenters today. Lori Ashley from Turnesol Consulting. Lori works diligently to help improve and sustain records and information management practices and controls that support business objectives. We are also joined by Matt Veach, who is the State Archivist of Kansas at the Kansas Historical Society, a position that he has held since 2006. A past president of the Council of State Archivists, also known as CoSA, and former co-chair of CoSA's State Electronic Records Initiative, also known as SARI. Matt has been actively engaged with electronic records management and digital preservation challenges since the mid-1990s. Tim Hodge has 25 years of experience as a software engineer and sales engineer in the business, intelligence, and search industries. He has joined Preservica in 2016, so he's new to our crew. And he works very closely with private and public sector organizations to demonstrate the value of digital preservation and how to satisfy technical requirements and answer questions. And our final speaker today is David Portman, who joined the Preservica team at the start of 2016 to promote awareness and education of digital preservation, having previously worked helping global organizations transform the management of IT assets, services, expenses, and usage. So thank you all for joining us today. So this is us. For those of you who don't know who we are, the Council of State Archivists is made up of representatives of the country's 56 state and territorial archives. And through this group, we work collectively to communicate archival and records concerns at a national level, and we work with such groups as the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, the NHPRC, and the National Archives, as well as national organizations at the front end of the public records business, like the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, to ensure that the nation's documentary heritage is being preserved and accessible. So we've long provided training for state government archivists, and now we are starting to branch out into working more directly with state government agency staff through webinars like this. And here's our website link, so if you're interested in finding out more about us and some of our programs, feel free. So we're going to start out here. The management of state government records has always been a challenge, but perhaps even more so now as our worlds are tending really more toward that digital realm than ever before. So records that were once held in paper at agencies for really long periods of time are now being held digitally, sometimes for decades. The definition of a record, as defined by the ISO standard for records management, takes this into account. And it really centers on the why information is created, not the how it's created and stored. In other words, if your organization creates and maintains information in connection with its business transactions or to meet some sort of a legal need, it really doesn't matter whether you're creating and storing that information on paper or in electronic files. Your organization is creating records, and the records need to be managed appropriately, regardless of whatever format they're in or on. So what this means for state government electronic records. For a state agency records management officers, it often means that we are looking at new partnerships to make sure that they are managed and disposed of appropriately according to their schedules. So one of the key potential partnerships for records managers in this challenge is with your IT department. Information technology, the left-hand side, that kind of greenish side, is really responsible for the creation and maintaining the technological infrastructure that supports an agency's business. And that's generally composed of the hardware, the software, the networks. You all know about this. And they provide the security mechanisms that limit access to those same systems and data. So the records managers on that blue side helps determine the value of the agency's record in whatever format they live in, and informs the agency how that information will be treated throughout its life cycle. That little turquoise sliver in the middle there, that's where your electronic records are living, and it's where these two parties meet. So it's really important to keep in mind that while they know their systems really well, IT staff typically don't have the kind of record-centered knowledge that records officers possess. And they may be aware that some of the data on their systems is legally restricted or really important, but they may not know and don't typically think in terms of long-term legal or historical value that an agency will create. So it's kind of up to the records management side of things to determine the business, legal, and historic value of the records that are created and stored in digital format, and to provide the retention and disposition guidance so that the IT side can integrate that information into their systems. And if that all works correctly, this will enable records managers to manage it more effectively and ultimately dispose of it according to schedules. So building that partnership with IT can take some time and may require some persistence because it's kind of a new one. But this is a relationship that is really well worth the effort, since both parties have a shared interest in ensuring that the digital information that the state government creates is created and managed in ways that effectively support the business needs of the creators, the organization, safeguards legal admissibility, adheres to laws, etc. And then it allows you to dispose of that information when it no longer has any business, legal, or historical value, which makes both sides happy. So as a records officer, you also have another partner that we want to make sure that you are aware of, and that's your state archives. In most states, the state archives is responsible for working with agencies to develop record schedules. In a few of our states, the state archives is situated in one agency and records management staff are housed within another. But regardless of our setup, we are available to help you with records appraisal and scheduling issues that you may have. So what else is it that we do? Well, state archives may provide training opportunities, one-on-one advice for your agency. We will also work with you to help transfer both paper and electronic records that have enduring legal or historical value out of your storage and into ours. So we're a pretty great resource of information about procedures and best practices for identifying, managing, storing, and transferring records that are specific to your state. Please keep in mind that everything in these webinars coming up here provides general information. So your state may do things a little bit differently, but we are really easy to find. So if you're not familiar with your state archives, you're going to find its contact information in the Directory of State Archives on the CoSA website. We've got a link here for you for that as well. So please feel free to get in touch with us regarding any questions that you have about how to manage your electronic records. So David?
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Hi, everybody. I just want to say before we get going, it is a great pleasure for Preservica to be working with CoSA on this practical digital preservation program in 2017. Now, before we get stuck into the agenda for today's session, for those of you who aren't familiar with Preservica, we are a specialist in digital preservation software. Over a decade of experience in the field of digital preservation, and we provide both cloud-hosted and on-premise solutions. We've got a growing customer list of around just over 100 organizations currently using Preservica from right across the globe, and that includes 18 US state archives. Okay, so as Sarah mentioned in her introduction, we do have some fantastic speakers lined up for you today, providing a variety of expertise and with different backgrounds to actually provide you with a really, well, an extremely comprehensive and useful session today. So as you're probably aware, this is the first of 3 workshops that we've got lined up for you coming up over the next month or so. The first 2 sessions today and then the second one on the 28th of February. We'll be covering the key concepts and processes of actually managing and preserving e-records throughout the records management lifecycle. And we're going to include some real-world examples as well, which I'll come on to in a minute. The third session, which is going to take place around the middle of March, is also going to feature some real-world case studies and also some incredible guest speakers who are actually going to discuss the implementation of new strategies and ways in which they're working with a variety of stakeholders, including the state archives. Okay, so bring our focus back to today's session. First up, looking at the key concepts. So we're going to hear from Laurie at Turner Searle Consulting, and Laurie's going to be talking to us about the long-term records requirements, including complexity of digital content, the challenges of government e-records, and also the importance of long-term access and preservation. And then following Laurie, we're going to hand over to Tim. Tim's going to take us through the approach and the challenges presented by keeping long-term digital records, and also going to touch on how to manage this threat through long-term digital preservation. And then we're going to hear from Matt Veach from Kansas State Historical Society. And Matt's going to be describing the 2 approaches they've used to engage key stakeholders in addressing the unique challenges and the nature of managing long-term electronic government records. And Matt's also then going to move on to share his perspectives on the pros and cons from each approach. And then towards the end of today, we're going to finish up with a summary. We're going to have a look ahead onto part 2 to see what's coming up, and then we're going to have a Q&A. So it's a great opportunity for you guys to put some questions to our speakers from today. Please use the Q&A box up in the right-hand corner of the WebEx client to ask those questions. We're going to address all of those questions you've got at the end of today's session. Okay, so that's the agenda there. So I'm going to hand over to Laurie to get us started looking at long-term records requirements.
Thank you, David. Appreciate the chance to be here today. I'm an independent records management consultant, and I've had the pleasure over about a 15-year period of working with a lot of different practitioners in this space, information technologists, and some of my favorite groups, the archivists and the records officers or records managers. And I've worked in public sector and private sector. Specifically, I've worked on projects for state of Kansas, state of North Dakota, state of Wyoming, and all 3 of those projects were great because they bridge that divide between records management and archives. And I also did some curriculum development that was used in California. So I'm delighted to have this chance to be with you today to share my perspectives, to just get us warmed up talking about some of the key concepts that are in this domain which you folks are working in. So this is a graphic from a great digital continuity action plan coming out of New Zealand, but the intent of it is just to recognize and to validate the very complex environment that all of you are working in today. Public sector digital information is dynamic, it's complex. This is actually pretty simplistic when you think about the environments that you're all dealing with, especially in large agencies that receive federal funding, where there's data flying back and forth and between the states and local governments, the state and the federal government, and there's a lot going on. So this is a recognition that the work that you do and the work that the archivists do who are represented by CoSA is very, very important, and you sort of have to find sometimes the needles in the haystack. And so we want to help by clarifying, bringing some of the concepts to bear, giving you some information about what can be done to manage some of this complexity and to support you. I've been working with CoSA since 2011, and I just want you to know that your state archivists have been working very hard to identify the gaps in state electronic records management and to build out capabilities in the archives to accept electronic records. They're, of course, experts already in paper and film records, but they've been working hard, taking tests, going to education seminars, doing programming, building out websites, making resources available, which you might want to take advantage of. So it's a great group, just as you are the records officers, hardworking, committed, collaborative, good sense of humor, because it's not easy. Sarah made a point. I just want to point out we've actually had electronic records for 50 years now, so we're still running a little bit behind the curve, and we want to step out and get more collaborative. So this is what you're used to working with. We build records retention schedules, and they capture the information from the agencies which define the records that they need to do their work. And these are just some snippets, and you'll see all of these have something in common, which are some very long retention periods. So as part of the scheduling process, we engage, we understand the business requirements, the regulatory requirements. We have to work with users who have some very diverse opinions on how long things should be kept and where they should go. But it's the role of the records officers to facilitate that conversation, and with the archivist to appraise records, to define them, to identify the requirements, and to help the agencies, the users, the divisions, the departments to get it right. And it's not always easy. So part of the scheduling process is identifying those things which have a long tail. And so you see some here: permanent records, or 75-year records, or until the youngest child is 21. Those indefinite retention periods when the trigger, we're not sure when it will happen, make your jobs very, very difficult. And it goes back to the point that Sarah made, that we have to collaborate with the folks who are overseeing the IT systems, because we have to pull all the threads together, make it apparent, collaborate, get people to understand what the requirements are, and then execute on those requirements which you have captured in retention schedules. So what you do is very, very important, but it captures the what and the why, but we have to figure out how to do the how. So just to give you some a point of context, when we talk about long-term, of course we mean permanent records. But the ISO 14721 standard, which is a reference model for how technology systems ought to process electronic records that need to be kept over successive generations of technology, define it as long enough to be concerned with the impacts of changing technology. And really that's a lot shorter than permanent. If you just reflect for a moment on your agency and the kind of changeover or updates or refresh that happens in the technology portfolio, you'll come up with some different answers about what that might be. So we need to be concerned about the changing user community, the changing technology, the changing requirements, and all those things, as you know, are quite dynamic. There was a survey done in 2007 by the storage network industry, and when they pooled archivists, records managers, IT practitioners, they came out with a consensus that anything beyond 10 or 15 years is considered long-term, because it's at that point that we begin to lose the ability to control the logical and physical migration. And so looking at your retention schedules, you can pick out anything which we retain only in digital format that has a retention of 10 years or longer, and it may be subject to this technology obsolescence that we need to be concerned about. And certainly it's the main thing that the archivists are contending with as they get more and more government records which are in digital format, whether that's converted from an analog format or whether that was born digital. So just kind of keep that marker in mind, that records that are longer than 10 years in retention or have been hanging around in digital systems for more than 10 years may be at risk. So this is nothing new to you. These are the challenges that you face every day. The increasing volume of records, the complexity of records. What I've seen in the last 10 years is a real consolidation of state IT resources, which sometimes means that folks that you were relying out in the agency have now been brought into a centralized area, and sometimes you lose that specialized expertise. The money kind of gets muddled together, and there are a lot of pressures on the IT in the agencies and in the consolidated branches to get this right, and it's not a problem that's going to go away easily. We certainly have litigation, or in your world, we deal more with the open records request. So how do we go find the content? How do we produce it? How do we manage it? How do we do it in an efficient and effective way? Certainly, we've seen our share of emergencies and disasters. The situation with the dam out in California is quite fascinating to watch, and suddenly something can happen, and our records can be at risk. There's a lot of pressure on governments to be transparent, to be accountable, to make their records accessible to the media and to the public. And then I think, within the last couple of months, we've seen a lot of uncertainty just around the change of administration. And so you folks deal with that at the state level all the time and in your agencies of where people are coming and going and may have different ideas about what the priorities are. So all these things are real, and they're not going away, and they are part of the challenge and the uncertainty of managing government records over time. One example, if we're trying to maintain digital content, a website, so agencies publish official documentation, guidelines to citizens, meeting minutes, other important evidence of what's going on in the agency. If you need to capture this, it's not just the physical digital objects and assets which machines can understand, but it's also the context, the conceptual understanding, the things that make it possible for humans to understand what we're looking at. And so just one example of it's not as easy just to capture a page. It's a lot more complex than that. And websites are only one of many, many different types of content that we are facing. So I imagine in most of your agencies, you've got all of this kind of content. We have images and audio and video, there's text files, lots of databases which are generating structured data sets, web content, you might have design files, and of course government relies heavily on geospatial information and mapping, and so all of these systems and these categories of records content are out there. So one of the things as records officers we need to do is not only understand the retention rules and the why, the statutory, legal, operational requirements behind them, but we have to know where this stuff is and in what format it lives, because this matters to how it can be presented and how it can be managed over time. So Sarah mentioned at the very beginning that IT are our partners, and it's because we can't do the work of records management without them, because content just lives in a lot of different places. It's in the cloud, it's on-premise, it's in proprietary databases, it's in office formats, it's moving between systems, and people are naming it and classifying it and associating it in lots of different ways. And so in records management, we have to move from having the rules and being able to be advisors and liaisons to the people and the areas where the content is being produced, to the folks who are overseeing those large, complex enterprise architecture and infrastructure environments, because they need us to help point out where the record content lives and what rules apply to it. So this is a part of what the archivists at CoSA are experiencing, and they're making good progress in engaging IT, sharing what the requirements are, getting over the battles of terminology, because archive to an archivist means something different than archive to an information technologist. And so finding that common platform, that common vocabulary, and then pooling our collective domain expertise in order to move it forward and get the right thing done for all of the users and all of the systems where government records live. Let me move ahead here. So I like to look at this as two sides of the disposition coin. And disposition in the ISO world means all of the actions that can happen across the life cycle. So destroy is one option in disposition. But the other disposition action that the folks on this call care very much about are those permanent records, the historical records, the records which have been identified as needing to be transferred to the state archives. And so when we engage with our stakeholders, we are looking to do a couple of different things. We're looking to apply the retention rules, whether that's temporary or long-term. We're trying to classify them, associate them to our retention schedules, to our file plans, capturing metadata so we know who created it and when and for what purpose and what business process it relates to. On the destroy side, we want to be able to remove electronic records from production systems as soon as we can, and of course not too soon, We want to get rid of redundancy and duplicative records, and we want to be able to document that the way that you've done traditionally in the paper world. So we have very good processes for authorizing destruction, certifying destruction, and keeping records that we had records. In the IT environment, those same processes are not always in place. So what we need to do for long-term records is we've got to pay attention to where they are in the active and inactive state way before they get to the archives. We've got to think about, can we disposition? Can we move content? Can we take action on it? Can we transform it to a format while it's still in the active or inactive phase? And it may never go to the archives. You certainly have permanent and long-term records inside your agencies that will never go to the archives. So you're basically in the similar position as the archivist of needing to know what the characteristics of those long-term records are, know what actions need to be taken to ensure that they're authentic and readable and usable over periods of time, and keep that association, that critical association between the objects and their metadata, because without metadata we can't understand the objects. And of course, when we think about government or we think about any large enterprise, we have to put the pieces together of these systems as much as possible and automate workflows. So today, where you may have to write content to a tape or a DVD or something and send it to the state archives, we want to get to the point where we can streamline the flow of information, move it into preservation environments as soon as possible so that we don't risk the chance that it will be unreadable. And so in the next section, Tim's going to tell you a little bit more about digital preservation. And through the case studies, you're going to hear more about what some of the states are doing to get those connectors between agencies and archives moving more smoothly. Because just like the records officers know that they're not seeing the paper they used to see come through, we don't have the boxes, we don't have as much stuff coming to the records center, the same thing is happening with the archivists. They're not seeing the permanent records come through, so they know that they're upstream inside electronic systems. So we anticipate there's a huge volume of pent-up demand, if you will, for the sort of preservation services, and the archives are getting ready to take that more and more of that content in a more automated and streamlined fashion. So records management is a shared responsibility. You guys are, as records officers, are in the mix working and advising the content creators and also working with the archivists to signal which things are upstream that need to come to them. You've got to have the support of your management, whether that's at the division or department level. You've got to have funding from various folks. One of the stakeholder groups with the CoSA are the chief information officers at the state, and so they're going to be engaging them further. You need system administrators, the folks who run a PeopleSoft application or a FileNet or a Outlook system, or you need all those folks to be engaged and aware of what's going on. And of course, we have our archivists and librarians. These are experts in metadata and classification and taxonomy and curation and all the things that enable us to keep important information assets for a long time. And of course, we all rely on third-party solution providers, service providers to help keep all the parts and pieces moving together. So it really takes a whole community of folks with very specialized expertise to come around these issues of electronic records and get them moving in the right direction. So when we think about long-term records, so again, we're thinking about electronic records that have to be retained for 10 years or longer or through one or more technology generations. What we've learned is that we can't take our eye off the ball. A piece of paper is a very stable medium, and we could set it aside and not pay any attention to it for a couple of decades, and when we went back to it, it would still be there and readable and usable. That's not the case with electronic records. There's too much happening in the infrastructure for us to take our eye off the ball. So you need to know where your long-term electronic records are. You need to engage folks who can help you apply the retention rules. Ideally, we're going to be talking to IT as early in the process as possible when they're contemplating changing out a system, when an agency is looking at buying a particular type of software. We want to get in there and we want to say, I think the system's going to be used for this sort of record, and here are the rules that I know. What are we going to do with it over its lifetime? How are we going to manage this sort of stuff? Lots of information needs to be captured about the formats and why we're creating the record. So that's metadata that will travel along the life of the record and certainly be a part of the archival record that the archivist will be taking care of. We need to get our hands dirty and learn more about information infrastructure and architecture and engage those folks who are looking after those things. And it does take specialized expertise, and that's some of what you're going to learn over the course of these 3 webinars, is that there's something to know about digital preservation, about keeping electronic assets alive over generations. And so we want to grow in our own knowledge as practitioners, and we also want to bring along those folks in the technology realm that we need to also be engaged and specialized expertise in this area. So we can't have access to records. The records won't be available in the future if we don't take preservation action. So preservation is applying technologies to monitor and then transform those objects over time and across generations of technology. And then on the access end, we're saving records today for people that haven't been born yet. And so access will rely also on evolving technologies in order to get records to people in the future who need to use them to make decisions, to trace their genealogy or other history. So I'm going to turn this over to Tim now, who's going to explain more about what's actually going on in that box that you see on the screen there, what's happening with digital preservation.
Okay, so hello everybody. See if I have, there we go. I think I have access now. All right, so thanks, Laurie, for that was a good setup for what I wanted to talk about. I've been in the software industry for a very, very long time, and so the whole concept here of having lots and lots of content that changes actually very quickly over time is something that I've experienced in a lot of ways. 20 years ago, I thought that relational databases were was the only way that people were ever going to save content and files. And you know, if you look at like some of the concepts in computing today, like big data, Hadoop, and things like that, the whole idea of relational databases has been thrown out for new kinds of technology. And what that leaves us with is lots of files that are sitting all over the place, and they're in lots of different kinds of formats. So what we have is a kind of a risk with our files, or a fragility with the files for a number of different reasons. One, because the formats become old and you can't use them. And then the operating systems and servers that we've used to create this content, they also get old too. I mean, you know, right now I'm running Windows 10, but 5 years ago I was running Windows 7, and I see lots of different kinds of operating systems all the time that are creating content. But we need to be able to normalize all that content and reduce the risk. And then these servers are continuously being updated, and there's no telling when this content will become at risk. Excuse me. So now, there's recently a study that was done that found that 90% of organizations need to keep digital content for a number of different reasons: compliance reasons, legal reasons, just in case there's like litigation, that kind of thing. Organizations also, a lot of the organizations that I've talked to over the last year or so in reference to digital preservation, is that they just want to keep their corporate history. They want to be able to go back and understand what's happened with a particular company or department or what have you over a period of time. And also, many of these companies really do understand that there is a technology obsolescence threat, you know, to their information, and that they really need to take care of that. Now, currently in lots of different industries, you know, really across the world, there's all kinds of information that is being held and needs to be held for long periods of time. You know, anytime you go to a doctor's visit, they have electronic records that they're keeping And these records have to be kept for a specific period of time for legal reasons. Also, if you're a homeowner, there's all kinds of mortgage and life insurance information, and lots of information that really has to be held for governance for different reasons. So this kind of information just absolutely has to be held, and it has to be safe. So now, one of the interesting things is that there's some statistics here on where information is held. And I found, the first time I saw this, I found this to be quite fascinating, because 68% of all information in companies is held in file shares. So I'm sure that people can certainly relate to that. I once had a situation in my last company where there was a file share where we kept all of our information, and it crashed. And when they went to back it up, they found that the backup system hadn't worked in a year or so, and we lost all kinds of information we didn't even know was at risk. And this is the thing that I think is important to mention, is that there's a lot of information out there that people really don't realize is at risk. And one of the things that we really are trying to do at Preservica is to kind of inform people that there's lots of information out there, and that there really is a way to mitigate that risk, and protect the information that you have in various different places around your organization. Now, really, what that means is, on the first level, is to protect the bits themselves, to make sure that the information is stored somewhere safely, so that it doesn't get corrupted, it doesn't. You don't lose it if some kind of a system or a server crashes, that there is some redundancy in place, and that you can save that information, and that information is saved in a reliable manner. Now, the other thing about that is that the information has to be organized. Lots of government agencies and large corporations, they have so much data that just storing it somewhere, even on a file share or a series of file shares, is no good, because nobody can get to it. You can't search it. There's no way to really understand what these large file stores have inside. So you need some kind of an organization. It needs to be searchable and accessible by the people that need to use it. And then the last part of it is that all of these files need to be in usable formats. So just having the data stored safely and organized really isn't enough, because when 10, 20, 30 years from now, when you go back and look at some of this information, if you can't bring it up and can't read it, it's out of date. And there are so many kinds of files out there. A good example is WordPerfect, or maybe QuickTime Movies, which really are at risk and have been kind of outdated. So we need to update that kind of information. I also have a lot of audio files personally that I have, and some of those formats have gone out of date, and it's very difficult to find ways to convert that. So that's one of the things that we are really focused on at Preservica, to make sure that we can migrate digital files so that they're usable into the future. So now, putting in place all of these systems is great, and having conversion routines and being able to reformat digital content is really an important thing. But doing it at scale is another thing that needs to be considered. It's one thing to have 100 files that you have to keep current, but it's another thing to have 100,000 or 1 million files that you need to keep current. And that's one of the things that we do at Preservica in our by organizing all the data and making sure that we have an idea of what is the content, what are the formats, where are the risks, what are we going to do when we come across files that are at risk. And we also you know, you also have to consider the fact that it's not just particular files don't just need to be migrated to one kind of format. There may be reasons why different formats need to be used. So there's going to be lots of options available for the different user communities out there that need this kind of thing. So, and once you have all of that data and files organized and put together and reformatted, then at that point, you really do have a good preservation system that that can be used and taken advantage of, and it does keep your data and files available for whatever long period that you need, whether it be 10 years or 100 years. So, so that's about it for me. I think Matt is next. Is Matt ready?
I am here.
Okay.
And I have control, apparently.
You do. Good.
All right. Let me see. Need to advance slides. Becky, why don't you go ahead and advance the slide for me?
All right, just 1 second. There we go.
Thanks very much, and you can go ahead and go to the first slide. All right, so my name is Matt Veach. I'm the state archivist here in Kansas. I've been trying to wrestle with electronic records, as my introduction indicated, since the mid-1990s. I've been doing this for a very long time. Most of the basic concepts, though, have remained the same. And in Kansas, we've really been focused on this concept of early intervention that our previous speakers have mentioned. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about one particular tool that we've been using with some success. None of these solve any of the problems, but I think there are things that other states could at least think about as they're attempting to get a handle on managing electronic records, particularly those with long-term retention requirements. So the first thing I'd like to talk about are these what we're calling IT project plan reviews. And just a little bit of background, here in Kansas, we have an information technology governance process that requires any IT project that is going to have a total cost of more than $250,000 to go through a relatively rigorous project planning process and a project management process once the project has been approved. So what we've been able to do here in Kansas, starting 17 years ago now, we were able to embed some electronic records management concepts into this particular IT governance process. And specifically in 2000, I was able to convince the Information Technology Executive Council to include in one of their policies something called an Electronic Records Retention Statement, an ERRS. And that's a series of questions that agencies are required to fill out or to answer when they are making their case to go ahead and get a project approved, one of these large $250,000 or more projects. And that went ahead for quite some time without any involvement from the state archives. It was one of those where we had questions in place. It was part of the overall IT project planning process, but there was no actual review on the part of by the state archives, by the state archivist, of these electronic records retention statements. And so it didn't have very much impact, and it became kind of just one of those extra pieces of paper that project managers had to complete when they were trying to get their projects approved. 10 years later, in 2010, again, these things take some time, and so I've learned to be very patient and kind of pick my battles over the years. And so 10 years later, we were able to get that policy changed to actually put the state archivist into the approval process itself. And so on these large-scale IT projects in Kansas, they require a letter of approval from the state archivist indicating in particular that their electronic records retention statement has been approved, and more fundamentally, that they have made appropriate plans, or they're planning to include appropriate procedures to ensure access and preservation of any long-term records impacted by the project that they are engaging in. This has had some pluses and some minuses. Becky, can you go to my next slide? I don't know why I can't control them. Thank you. So there are kind of pros and cons of this IT project plan process. It's been one in which I think we've raised awareness among records or among the IT community about the fact that there are records management requirements that are just business requirements like any other business requirement in the development of an electronic system. It also makes the state archives more aware of new record-keeping systems as they're coming online. It allows us to get involved very early and make sure that if records of long-term value are being impacted, that we're aware of them, and we can make sure that they get added to retention and disposition schedules. And ultimately, it makes us aware of things that need to come to the state archives. On the con side, some of the challenges that we face is on these project plans, we're dealing almost exclusively at the very beginning with IT people, and more specifically with the project management community. And there is not always a great awareness of the fact that records are even something that they have to be concerned about. There's no real awareness of how records retention and disposition schedules fit into the overall kind of records governance process for state agencies. And specifically, we do seek to loop the records officers into this process, but it can be sometimes a bit challenging to do so because they are not always kind of part of the IT project planning process in their agencies. So we do struggle sometimes to make sure that communication is solid between IT and between records officers. And quite honestly, we have to struggle sometimes to make sure that the archives does not become an obstacle to progress. You know, the surest way for us to get cut out of this entire process is to become so difficult that projects get held up, and we really don't want to risk the overall our overall involvement in this process by being obstacles. And so we're always working to be as conciliatory as possible while still making it clear that there are these record-keeping requirements. And then finally, there is almost always some follow-through that is required with these IT project plans. These approval processes take place before the project starts. And so there is almost always some requirement if the project impacts records with long-term value, and in our case those are records with 10 or more year retention requirements, then we need to do something while the project is being implemented to work with the agency. And that's a challenge both from the agency side, the records officer side, and from the state archive side, given our limited staffing. So this is a great tool. It's really a good thing to be involved this early in the process, but with that responsibility comes a certain level of accountability and a certain level of follow-through that we have to engage in, and so that's something we've always struggled with. All right, Becky, please go on. Thank you. The second tool that we have here in Kansas that I'd like to talk about is I decided to call it preventive care. It's often involved at the early phase of a new record keeping system, but oftentimes it's something that takes place after an electronic record keeping system has already been implemented. Sometimes it's something that's been in place for many years. And so what this is something that we call an electronic record keeping plan. And it's, again, it's a tool that we've had in our toolbox for, probably since the early 2000s. And it is something that is tied directly to our retention and disposition schedules. An electronic record keeping plan is just simply an addendum to an agency's retention and disposition schedule. And it's required for any long-term record, any 10-plus year retention records that are maintained exclusively in electronic form, or for which their record copy is viewed as being in electronic form. And so this is something that usually comes about as we're working with an agency on retention schedule updates and revisions, and we make it clear that our State Records Board, which is the body that approves retention and disposition schedules, requires this electronic record keeping plan to accompany any electronic records with that long-term retention requirement. And what we do is we work with them. It's a relatively lightweight document. It's not an incredibly intensive questionnaire, but it's a couple of pages, and we ask questions that relate to records integrity and authenticity. We talk about storage of the documents, metadata requirements, backup procedures, and disaster planning, and then we get into some things that archivists would call preservation planning, where we're trying to understand what are the processes that an agency has in place for making decisions about migration or conversion of file formats or of the entire system. It is the process itself is one in which we include an electronic records committee. That is, the electronic records committee is an interagency committee that reviews and endorses these electronic record keeping plans. Kind of generally has a more technical bent to it, and then those go on to the State Records Board for ultimate approval. And Becky, one more slide, please. So these electronic record keeping plans, again, what we have found is that they've been incredibly helpful. I would say, really, really helpful in the area of raising awareness and providing education to state agency IT professionals, records officers, program managers, all of the different people that you need to work with in order to analyze and schedule and manage records. The electronic record keeping plan has given us a way to raise their awareness of the special challenges associated with electronic records. All of the things that Tim and Lori were talking about, we don't always touch on every single one of those things in the electronic record keeping plan, but it forces agencies to think about their electronic systems, their digital systems, in ways that they haven't ordinarily had to think about them. On the con side, it can be very intimidating. We originally had a much more extensive questionnaire for this electronic record keeping plan. We've cut it back. We cut it back once, and we're in the process of revising it again, so as to make it less intimidating for those having to fill it out. So there's a fairly steep learning curve for agency staff, and we're constantly trying to improve the questionnaire itself, the survey instrument, to try and make it so that we make it clear that it's not something to be scared of. It's just something to make agencies think through and be very intentional about the way that they think about their electronic record keeping systems. And then finally, for us, it's another one of those things that we have to keep updated. Obviously, technology changes rapidly. Uh-oh. Lost my audio.
We can still hear you.
You can still hear me. Okay.
Yep, you're good.
All right. Sorry. So finally, like I said, it's one of those things that we have to keep updated. We struggle to keep records retention and disposition schedules updated. We're constantly behind on that. We have exactly 2 staff to do this in Kansas for 80 or some state agencies. This adds one more thing to keep up to date. But I do believe that we feel like this is something that is worth doing, and it allows us to ask questions that need to be asked. And with that, I will turn it back over to probably Sarah's time to conclude, or maybe David's.
Yep, it's back to me, Matt. Thank you very much for that. Great insight there into the approaches you're taking at Kansas into managing long-term electronic records. So just before we move on then to questions, just as a reminder to use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your WebEx client there to ask our speakers today some questions. Just a very quick summary. you know, I think it's important to realise, and I think a lot of you will be aware of this, but you know, public sector digital information that's deemed to have long-term value, it's going to be passed through a number of technology environments across its lifespan. And these environments are going to change and actually challenge its authenticity and its accessibility as well. And we're actually seeing a exponential rise in access and use of public records by those outside of the agencies. You know, public sector digital information is critical that it's maintained so that it's actually possible to find quickly, to retrieve, and to actually use the information as well. I mean, records and information, it's got to be organised. You know, Tim touched on this during his session, and it's got to be safely stored. And that's going to mean it's searchable and it's trustworthy, you can rely on it, it's got provenance, and that it actually protects it from any unauthorised access, and that's right across the lifespan of that record. Now, minimising barriers to cross-agency information sharing and transfer, it's going to improve collaboration and it's going to reduce duplication of effort. Having a robust cross-agency infrastructure for long-term digital preservation should actually result in significant economic savings as well. So it's going to remove the need for each agency to go away and develop its own solution. And finally, their active file format migration. You've got to ensure that your content is going to be readable and accessible for the long term, way into the future. Okay, so just a quick look at some resources that are available on the CoSA website. You've got the PERTS portal there for electronic records training, tools and standards. There's a link there for you. Also, the rest of this program is available on the CoSA website. I think we've got at least another six or seven in the program coming up over the next 3 or 4 months. If you did want to investigate some digital preservation resources, webinar recordings, white papers, and also have a deeper dive on that information governance report that Tim touched on in his session, then you can go onto the Preservica website and the resources and download a copy of that information governance report there. And also, if you would like to see digital preservation software in action, please do sign up for one of our 3 to attend live demos, the next one being this week on Thursday. Okay, so we're going to move on to questions in just a second, but just very quickly, having a look ahead to next part 2 of the workshop, which is taking place on February 28th. In this session, we're actually going to focus on retention and disposition strategies and tools. We're going to be joined by guest speaker Beth Shields from the Kentucky Department of Libraries and Archives, and Beth's going to come in and provide a use case for the agency or the collaboration between the agency and the archives. We're also going to share some highlights from our recent session on how to foster and sustain collaborative relationships with IT leadership and practitioners. And then we're going to do a quick summary and a preview of part 3. Okay, so let's move into our questions. And I see a few have come in already, so I'm just going to make my way to the first one. Okay, so we've got a question from Susan. It's about PDF format for textual documents. Is it important to use a PDF-A format for archival document long-term preservation, or is PDF enough? I'll put that one to Tim.
All right, here I am. The thing is that it's really up to your own discretion as to what you would like to use. I mean, once you have it into at least the Preservica archive, and you have the original copy, you can always migrate it to another format if you need to. So starting off with just PDF is fine. If later on you find you need PDF-A or some newer kind of format, then you can do that at that time. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my comment on it.
And this is Sarah, and I would recommend that perhaps you talk to your archives. If it's something that's going to be transferred to them, they may have some standards or preferences that you are unaware of.
Okay, fantastic. Hopefully Matt did answer your question there, Susan. So we move on to the next one. This is from Glenn, and this is a question for Matt. Do the agencies create and edit the electronic records keeping plans directly, or do they communicate their plans to your staff and your staff document it?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, they usually, there's a template, and I'm going to eventually, here's the, I'm going to send the template out. So there's a template that agencies fill out. They often will take a crack at it on their own. They'll send it in to the State Archives staff for review. It usually goes through a review, kind of a back and forth to get the language kind of cleared up a little bit. And sometimes we'll provide them with examples from other agencies that are kind of model electronic record keeping plans. And then oftentimes, once it goes to the Electronic Records Committee, then there will be additional revisions to it. And so it's just, it's usually a couple of months, a 6 to 8 week process from beginning to end. So it's not, we'd like it to be smoother. We'd like it to be maybe some kind of online form at some point. Right now it's just a fillable, we just put it up there as a Word doc and people fill it out. But it's a two-way process.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And then the next question, I think you've already answered this, Matt, by sharing that link and just speaking there. So the next question was from Lydia. Do you have a Kansas State Electronic Records Planning Survey tool for government agencies available online? So Matt has shared a link there to the Kansas Electronic Record Keeping Plan in the chat box. So if you're interested in that, just grab that out of the chat box. Okay, so another question coming in from Glenn. Why did you decide to involve the State Records Board? Well,
we gave that a lot of thought, actually. This is something that we worked with Lori Ashley on this type of thing, and we were trying to decide: is this an IT governance process domain, or is it the records management or kind of records governance domain? And we ultimately decided in the state of Kansas that the State Records Board, which is kind of has the purview over establishing records retention, disposition requirements, and offering records management advice, that it made more sense to embed it there. And it kind of gives it, by having it go through the State Records Board, it gives it a little bit more authority than, say, if just the state archivist said it, or if we went through some sort of an information technology governance process. So that's where we've chosen to locate a fair amount of the guidance documents that come out related to electronic records management. We've chosen to focus on that kind of that records governance domain.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Matt. Right, so last call for final questions. Anyone's got any final thoughts or questions for the guys? Please do enter it today in the Q&A box.
And there will also be a survey that'll pop up when you log out, so you can ask additional questions there as well if you'd like. I think there's a notes field in there for any other comments, and we will take a look at those before the next presentation and get those answered, probably at the next meeting.
Okay, great. Right, okay, so no more questions coming in oh, last minute question coming from Ronald. What is the current process being used to keep old data updated so the data can run on new program versions? Do you have someone physically moving file by file? For Matt. If you're still there, Matt.
That's for Matt. Wow. Let me read that again. So what is the current process being used to?
I'm assuming it's for you, Matt. I
don't know. I'd say that's more a Tim question, maybe, or it sounds more technical to me. Tim, you want to take a crack at it?
Yeah. I don't see the question on my display here. Can you just repeat the question again for me?
Yeah, I'll repeat it, Tim. So Ronald is asking, what is the current process being used to keep old data updated so the data can run on new program versions? Do you have someone physically moving file by file?
Well, if you're a Preservica user, we don't really do it file by file exactly. I mean, really, what we do is we can like run some reports or some processes that will go out and survey the archive and come back with a list of file types or formats that could potentially be at risk. And then from there, what you would do is some kind of an analysis on take those file types, and select the ones that you would like to move, and then you can configure a workflow with a set of upgrade processes that will say, for each of these file types, convert it into this new file type, and then you can also decide what you want to do with that resulting file. A lot of the customers I work with, they automatically make them the new presentation type. But you can also have multiple manifestations of a certain file type that can be stored and used at later times. So there's a number of different things you can do. And with Preservica anyway, it's really automated. It's not file by file. Although if you do have one file, you can operate on one file at a time if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. So I hope that answers your question.
And if you're in an agency, you might want to talk to your IT department. A lot of times when they're migrating systems, the file migration is part of that, but that is also how things get lost. For things that get lost on a server or on a share, that that eventually you can't open it because somebody forgot to migrate it. So it's kind of it's another one of those great partnerships with your IT, possibly.
Superb. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Tim. So as Sarah said, if you do have any further questions, we are a little bit over time here, so I think we're going to wrap up for now. But if you do have further questions, please do submit those in the survey. So I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our speakers today who've joined us, and thank you to everyone who's joined this session online today as well. Hope you've enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, and we look forward to you joining us again for part 2 on February 28th. Okay, have a great day, everyone.